So I've made some decisions based mostly on mechanical R&D and also the suggestions of a couple of friends. You remember my conundrum with the nut and how I was going to deal with the nut on these smaller hubs. There's just no room for that socket. And a buddy of mine suggested just drilling a couple holes in that nut and making a spanner wrench to tighten and untighten it. And that way I don't have to clear out a counterbore big enough for the socket. And I mentioned this to another buddy of mine, and he went even one step further and said, well, if you're going to make a spanner nut out of it, you don't even need the flats. You could get rid of all those corners and round it off, make it round, and really reduce the OD and really reduce the size of the counterbore that you're going to have to put in there. So those alterations would be required for these two props. This prop we've already determined, not a big deal. I can make a counterbore big enough for the socket and no big deal. So that's kind of made my first decision for me. In everything goes against R&D, I'm going to go from the finest pitch prop, the 16/6s that I was running, to the coarsest prop I've got, which is this 16/18, which is not how I would recommend R&D in this, but because of what I'm going to do with this nut, mechanically it makes sense. Okay, so I'm not even sure if my engine will spin this 16/18 setup, but we'll find out. In addition to that, you knew I had to do some work on the face of these two props to get them to fit onto the plane. So before I bored them, I needed to use my prop reamer to create a little counterbore in there so I could hold the prop on my Unimat and use my little micro fly cutter on it to take the meat off that hub that I'm trying to get off of there. And as you can see, it was quite successful. The fact that I still had to do this one, the fact that I had to do that and be able to use my prop reamer on it meant that I couldn't put this bore in these two props yet. All right. So that's why this one was done first. I basically did this one just to check my fixture, make sure it was solid enough and was going to be beefy enough to handle the job. And here's a little video of that prop clamped up in the fixture right before I bored it. And it turns out that bore worked out really nice. It's only 2/1000ths under. So I just need to get a little flapper sanding wheel or whatever, run inside there a few times and it'll slip right on there. Now I'll show you a little video of the Unimat doing some fly cutting on that prop. That was a 10,000th pass with the little micro fly cutter. This is a pretty awesome little machine. And here you can see I've gone about as far as I can go. I'm at the end of my X travel, and that's where I stopped cutting. So that's as far as I can go. That's as much as I can take off of it. And we'll see how much that is. So I've taken off 247 thousandths. Basically a quarter of an inch. Or 6 millimeter for you metric minded folk. So, quarter of an inch is actually pretty good. Now, now I'm clear of anything to do with the front prop, even though there's going to be a giant counter bore in the front of here. I'd still like to be clear of it completely, and it looks like I am now. And as you can see, the work I've done is basically within the confines of the fuselage. So I'm not affecting a whole lot of the prop that's outside the fuselage, which is a good thing. But I've gone as far as I can go. I'm going to have to counterbore it now. But first I have to do some work to the 1614 so I can counterbore them and counterbore them both at the same time. So now I need to bolt this one on the Unimat and take these features off the back side. Looks like that could be a quarter of an inch as well, but I'm going to get into too much of the blade probably if I take a quarter of an inch. So part of that may have to be kind of hand sanded. I don't know. I'll see once I get into it. But I'll start out taking a little bit of that feature off, just like I did with the other one, out to the edge of the fuselage before I start affecting the airflow from the prop. And that's the next step. That's where I'm at.